憲法仲間だと聞きました。
王者と
葉月岩をご存知ですか？
葉月。お主は？
葉月亮と言います。岩は俺の親父です。
ほほう。暇つぶしに一つ手合わせでもしてみるか。
え？
どうした？こんな年寄りの相手はつまらぬか？
いえ、お願いします。
何をぼさっとしておる。打ってこぬか？そんな攻撃では肺が止まるわ。それで本すぎる。隙だらけじゃ。どこのチョコ憲法じゃ。やっと本気になってきたな。
今の技は
八極拳奥義鉄山功。
親父のことを知っているんですか？何か知っていることがあれば教えてもらえませんか？
まあ気が向いたらの。
Okay, so I was going to do a video looking at Dead or Alive 6 today. The latest round of DLC was announced over the weekend and I think it looks pretty cool and I have thoughts about that and I want to talk about it. But I've decided to do Shenmue instead today, particularly Shenmue 3. This game was released last week now and I have been playing it like crazy. I think it is an amazing bit of art and it is one of my favourite games of the year, and I've looked at some of the other responses that this game has been getting amongst critics and players, and unsurprisingly it's a little bit polarising. So I wanted to do this video to look at some of the language that people are using to talk about this game, and why I think it's another example, along with Death Stranding, that the video game industry is not overly well structured to talk about video games as art still. I think that there is still a disconnect there, where people still talk about video games as product, and that is quite at odds with a game like Shenmue 3. So when a game like Shenmue 3 or Death Stranding comes along, there is a bit of conflict about how to actually look at the game and how to talk about it and how to analyse it. So there's one word that I really wanted to single out in reference to how people are talking about Shenmue 3, and that is the word dated. Now, if video games are art and Shenmue, as an example of a video game, is therefore a work of art, then dated doesn't really apply. It's the wrong word to use in any situation. Dated is something that you put on a packet to tell you when you have to consume the product by. It is a consumption word for a product. So you've got the use by date on a can of soup, or you've got a best before on a packet of dried vegetables or whatever. And if you don't consume the product by that point in time, it then becomes worthless. And that is really what people are talking about when they talk about a game or a work of art being dated. If you experience that work of art past the point where the date, over the threshold of the date, whatever that arbitrary line is, then the game no longer has the value that it would have had was it released before that point in time, which is absolutely nonsense. I mean, if you look at any other art form, we don't talk about things in that kind of framework. We don't talk about Shakespeare being dated, even though Shakespeare has been around for a lot longer than Shenmue. We don't talk about that in that term. If you were to write an essay on Wuthering Heights and you were to put that essay in to your teacher, your professor, whatever education you're doing, if you were to call it dated and therefore no longer relevant, then you would not get a good mark, I can assure you, because art doesn't date like that. It doesn't get old. It retains its relevance and it retains its cultural property. And we don't talk about video games in that regard. We have this expectation that a video game, because it's a product and that's how people generally talk about them, if it falls outside of a certain threshold, then it loses its value. And we've seen this issue come up over and over and over again in video games. We've seen, for example, Sony executive, I can't remember his name right now, but came out and said that nobody wants to play PlayStation 1 games because they look old now. Or anytime a game with pixel art comes out, there's a certain number of people that talk about it as being, a pixel game and therefore old style and therefore only for people who have a retro nostalgia for these games. I remember Octopath Traveler on the Nintendo Switch. It was released as a full-price game, and it should have been a full-price game because it was gorgeous and it was a full-fledged production by Square Enix. But there was quite a few people that said it shouldn't be a full-price game because it's just pixels. The inference being that pixels are dated and therefore it's not really a premium quality game. And that is just not how art works. And that is, Shenmue's a really, really good example of this. Thankfully, Death Stranding, which was also criticised for being an artistic product, didn't have that issue because it was definitely didn't leave any impression that it was based on something old. But this game, because Shenmue is based on a series that was 20 years old now, there is that treatment of it as though because the original was 20 years ago, it's no longer relevant today. But instead of talking about the game as a dated product and therefore not as valuable as a new and shiny game today, why aren't we talking about this game in the frame of it being a really beautiful story, a very personal project by the creator Yu Suzuki? Because this is a very personal project for him and is very clear, throughout the whole thing, that this means a lot to him. And he's been willing to make compromises to how a game should be put together today in order to drive home his artistic vision. For example, there's very little fast travel in this game. You can do a little bit of it when it really is just a matter of convenience. But for the most part, because Yu Suzuki wanted you to really get involved in the game and really experience it and experience its world, he forces you to kind of walk back and forth. And I realise that to some people that will come across as dated, but it's not. It's artistic vision, and that's the point. You can criticize a game for its artistic vision, of course you can. Not everybody likes every piece of art, and I've said that before in this channel. I said it with Death Stranding. You don't have to enjoy a game just because you're treating it like a piece of art. And I certainly think that Shenmue is a game that won't appeal to everybody because it is that very slow-paced, methodical, narrative-driven and cultural product. And I don't think that necessarily translates across very well to Western markets. But to try and dismiss it as a work of art by calling it dated and therefore old and no longer relevant and no longer worth talking about, that's a little bit of a misuse of language. And I don't think it's deliberate by people that say that a game is dated. I just think it's for lack of a better term. But there is this perception that if a game doesn't fit within a very narrow mould of what is new and current, it must therefore be flawed. And I don't think that's the case. See, for me, when I was playing this game, what I got was a great sense of theatre. There's a real rhythm to the way that Shenmue's story unfolds, which is quite unique to Shenmue. There's this almost disjointed delivery of lines where characters are talking like they're reading lines from a play. And initially that's a little bit off-putting. It feels like it was not perhaps refined as well as it should be. But after a couple of hours of it, and once you get a chance to adjust to its different rhythms, it actually comes across really theatrical and really beautifully told. A little bit like, it was a bit like the sense that I got when I was reading plays like The Cherry Orchard or even Waiting for Godot. There's this kind of, it's not stilted, but you read it as stilted as you're reading the play because you're reading each line and you're kind of digesting what's going on. This game really encourages you to really pay attention to every line, and it repeats itself often. It is stilted, like I said. It has these sometimes awkward moments, and there is this very, like I said, this very theatrical style to it. It's almost like Yu Suzuki envisioned this as a play before he decided to turn it into a game, and that's quite beautiful. We don't get much of that kind of approach to storytelling in video games, and it should be something we should be encouraging. We should judge it on its merits, not because it's not like other games that we've played and whatever's popular right now. Yes, it doesn't read like a Spider-Man game, or I'm sure the Avengers game when it comes out next year is going to be much more big action and quirky characters throwing quips around as they kill one another. This game is much slower and more methodical and much more graceful and much more introverted and introspective, and it wants you to think, it wants you to feel, it wants you to just absorb the world into it, and it's quite beautiful. It's a really, I mean, I remember that people were a little bit put off by the character models when they started to see this game in development, and initially at first, again, it looks a little bit like the character models were brought from an earlier generation and just done up a little bit more, but the environments and the way that the character kind of exists within those environments is really quite beautiful and deliberate, and it's very clear that this project, much like Death Stranding, was a very personal work, and the director was not going to allow anything to get in the way of his artistic vision. This is something that he wanted to finish because he'd done the first two and he had this story which he still needed to finish. He wanted to finish it. He had the fan base who wanted him to finish it, so he created it in that vision, and I don't think that that is something that should be criticized. It should be lauded. And that's not to say I think this game is perfect either. There's a whole lot of stuff I don't like about this game. I can't stand the combat system for a start. I've never liked the combat in Shenmue games. I thought the first two didn't do it very well either. And you know, it's not the thing that I try to master while I'm playing this game. I just do what I need to level my character up enough that I can get through the various fights. Like, for example, this one that you're seeing on the screen in front of you, I lost that the first time I fought it. I went and leveled up a bit, found it relatively easy the second time around, and that's basically how I approached combat. It wasn't something that I wanted to master. I didn't want to spend ages practicing the various combo systems and all that. I just wanted to get through it. I didn't think it was good. I've never thought the combat was an important part of Shenmue. I always thought it was secondary to the storytelling. And there are certainly elements about some of the characterization I wasn't a big fan of. Some of the characters I thought were not performed particularly well or up to the standard of the main characters, but those were minor complaints. And as with all Shenmue games, the side distractions are fairly limited. This one has some fun little gambling games. You saw the turtle racing game beforehand, and it's got the gachas which you can play with to try and build those up. You can earn money by playing a couple of little mini games as well, but all of that is just kind of side distractions. Again, the main point of everything in Shenmue is to drive people towards the next part of the story, but do so in a way that is paced slowly enough that they have time to really take it in and to experience it. And I think this is a really majestic game, and I think that a lot of people have gone into this with the wrong expectations. They expected something modern, they didn't get that, so they called it dated, which again, I don't think is the right word to describe it. But anyway, that's it for me for this video. I will have a review up on digitally-downloaded.net about the same time, so check that out. Otherwise, please do like and subscribe on my channel if you enjoy my stuff. I do enjoy doing these. I want to do more, and your support is really useful for that. Please consider backing me on Patreon if you like my thoughts and ideas or find my videos interesting enough. Otherwise, we will see you at the next video.